Denis Villeneuve's Dune has been out for well over a month, and with the film returning to IMAX in the next week, and it finally releasing in Australia and New Zealand, the hype and positive responses have only continued to flow during all this time. The film has had the lowest week-to-week drop of any film globally during the pandemic, and I think that just speaks to how happy people are with this adaptation of Frank Herbert's seminal novel. But in this video, I'm going to be discussing why I believe Denis Villeneuve got Dune right when it comes to how the material was adapted for the big screen, along with how his particular approach to filmmaking supported this successful endeavour. Before I get into it though, if you want to keep up to date on any of my future content on Dune 2021, then don't forget to support this video by giving it a like rating, subscribing to the channel, and turning on your notifications. Also, feel free to check me out on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Instagram at Cortex Videos, which is all linked in the description below. But without further ado, let's dive into how Denis Villeneuve got Dune right. It's no secret that filmmaker Denis Villeneuve has since his teenage years been obsessed with Frank Herbert's Dune. He remembered reading the book when he was about 13 years old, and it instantly sprung cinematic visuals and ideas into his mind, but he never knew if he could bring them to the big screen. Even when getting the green lights to make his adaptation, he was making the film based off of a childhood memory, and like fellow composer Hans Zimmer, he's kept that memory for decades without letting it be altered by the adaptations that have released ever since. He's spoken about how he loves elements of David Lynch's Dune and the other takes, but tried to stay away from being too inspired by them because there's things that he clearly didn't like, and filmmaker David Lynch doesn't particularly like them either. But what's clear from Villeneuve's film is an enthusiasm for the world of Dune, a bold take for a movie that already has a $165 million budget, and is an adaptation of the biggest selling science fiction novel of all time. While Dune had enormous challenges to overcome, Denis saw these as strengths, with his adaptation aiming in at the smaller details, rather than becoming more like the conventional approaches that Hollywood is used to putting out. Like David Lynch, Denis is one of the best filmmakers of his time, with a unique style and auteur print that he places on every film. He uses visual imagery and atmosphere to tell dense stories and elevates the crucial messages, along with the characters within the storytelling. And for a book like Dune, this is already a perfect fit when bringing this to the big screen in a day and age where we don't get much science fiction films like this. And Frank Herbert's Dune is of course a notoriously dense book, and not the kind of story that most filmmakers would deem likely or fitting to bring to the big screen. Alejandro Jodorowsky tried to bring ambitious ideas with big names attached, and of course Lynch just couldn't quite craft the right tone, and its pacing wasn't executed to a high standard. It skipped through important character moments and jumped over parts that made it obvious that whoever was going to adapt this in a sensible way would have to take their time to really allow elements and scenes to be fully adapted. There has to be a balance of bringing your own filmmaking style while adapting the material in the right way. And while Lynch did bring his trademarks, the material got lost within that. I think for the time, Lynch's version had great special effects, and as a cult sci-fi film, it did bring something different, a sort of anti-Star Wars approach. And of course, Jodorowsky had some intriguing ideas that just never saw the light of day. We had the Dune miniseries too, that did a decent job of bringing all the material to the screen with a larger running time. But one thing was missing in that version, and that was that Dune has the potential to be extremely cinematic. Frank Herbert's Dune is a transportive piece of science fiction that can give creators a level of inspiration that grows into wanting to see smaller things like the sounds of Arrakis or what a character is feeling in a given situation. It's the kind of story that calls for a big screen realization, one that, like cinema, transports you to a world you are unfamiliar with. It calls back to the hallmarks of great sci-fi, and it's one of the books that really made that a staple. And the new adaptation by director Denis Villeneuve, a filmmaker who proved he could successfully pull off impossible sci-fi projects we'd never dreamed of seeing done right, has once again given us trust in his work. He called back to those childhood memories, showing he was comfortable with tackling it and demonstrating his visual inspiration on huge IMAX screens. His work is atmospheric, introspective, and brings visual yet emotionally driven stories to the audience, showing great imagination and examination of important concepts. As he has said in interviews since the film's release, he made this film for himself and those who were getting lost in Dune for the first time and hadn't read the book. It's the idea of reimagining what it felt like as a teenager to come across Arrakis and the character of Paul Atreides for the very first time, bringing us visuals, sounds, vistas, and themes that we hadn't seen dealt like this on the big screen before. In particular, he establishes a direct focus and does so in a way that allows you to be immersed in the story and in an authentic cinematic adaptation. But this cinematic take can only work if the material is approached correctly and brought to the screen in a way that does it justice. And for the most part, the director has done the first half of the book right. He establishes the focus for his film straight away by having the very opening scene be about Arrakis and the people on that world, rather than Arrakis and its resources. We don't have to slowly introduce the audience to what's going on the planet with the Harkonnens and the Fremen, we get there immediately. And even Chani, played by Zendaya, gets the introductory speech over Princess Irulan. And I'm sure that Denis will have Irulan maybe even open the next movie with a speech, but part 1 is focused on exactly what it needs to be. We see her home planet being invaded by the Harkonnens, who wish to harvest the powerful resource known as spice, and therefore from the beginning, Dune Part 1 is outlined as a story about colonization. And this only develops throughout as we transition into Paul Atreides and his process of adaptation to the world that has already become easily accessible for the audience. And this direct focus also carries over to the natural progression of scenes and the characters that share them. There's no dramatic skipping over elements to fit everything into a shorter runtime. With more room to breathe and this being a part 1, the director understood that the audience needed the time to really get into the world and people at play within that. There's no briefly summarising integral elements that are linked to Paul's development, such as the early scenes on Caladan or the final knife fight with Jamis, one which would help mould him into the person he becomes. Every scene is given importance because one ends and leads into the next one, continuing that piece of development. And even when we do jump to a character's viewpoint, we see their reaction to the events that have just occurred. At many times, the characters are isolated, and Denis has masterfully made it all feel natural and even more connected than ever through his work with editor Joe Walker. This is aided by the performances, of course, making us understand who these characters are and the wider circumstances of the story. It's conveyed that Josh Brolin is perfect for the role of Weapons Master Gurney Halleck, barking with concern for the safety of the young Paul Atreides and his potential dangerous journey. Jason Momoa plays Swordmaster Duncan Idaho with a sense of freedom and speaking in inspirational context with Paul. Stellan Skarsgård brings a huge presence, yet one that's fittingly grotesque for the character of Baron Harkonnen, and even Sharon Duncan-Brewster gives us a portrayal of Dr. Liet Kynes that is much bigger in the film and has a more impactful ending in a moment of sacrifice. And when placing these characters in scenes, while Denis does give us multiple interconnected moments like with the Gom Jabbar scene and the events with the Reverend Mother that follow, he uses very little dialogue. He could have easily adapted all of the dialogue to the screen, but as a quality filmmaker, he understood that film is a different medium. While this adaptation is extremely faithful, adapting all of the book scene by scene to film just wouldn't work as a coherent and structured story for the genre of filmmaking. But more importantly, this approach works for all types of audiences watching this version of Dune. It's great for those who are familiar with the source material and don't want vital scenes wasted with exposition. And it also visually tells us the story in an easy way that new viewers will be able to understand quite straightforwardly. Although Dune is a story with a lot going on, and it includes many phrases that you'll need to write down, the benefit of this method is that the filmmaker allows moments the freedom, communicating the scale of Arrakis and the more psychologically cerebral elements in Paul's dreams with looks at his potential future. In total, there's a focus on characters and scenes in a natural way, and the dialogue and elements he doesn't adapt from the book are brought to the big screen visually. He had to cut out scenes like the dinner sequence and Gurney playing the balisette, but kept ones in the movie which helped build out the character of Paul and kept the mystery and tone of vital moments. It's a perfect example of breaking a story down and showing what needs to be on screen for this particular adaptation, and not by constantly telling us this or reciting Shakespearean quotations from the book. Like I was getting at before, Denis Villeneuve's ultimate aim was to make people not familiar with Dune love the world, while also truly respecting what most fans love about the book. Its relatable themes and politics, its world building, and the way it challenges you. He succeeded in merging the art film with the blockbuster. The best of both worlds when it comes to mainstream audiences and what they want. It feels large in scope without being dumbed down, contemplative without being overly flashy, yet visually dazzling to the right degree. The filmmaker has of course focused on larger scale films more recently, and with part 2 in the pipeline, he'll stay in that lane for the next couple of years. But what's clear after Arrival, Blade Runner 2049, and now Dune, is that he's one of the rare directors who's able to make big films without losing a sense of unoriginality, giving us event cinema that means something, rather than bringing one of the many weightless feeling blockbusters that dominate screens today. He knew this was a challenge to overcome, but like he has said in previous interviews, cinema is art and art is risk. Cinema has quite obviously always been a weird combination of art and commerce, and I personally think that with Dune, what we get is a perfect blend of those two things. But that was my video discussing why Denis Villeneuve got his adaptation of Dune right. Like I said, I really like elements from the other adaptations of Frank Herbert's novel, but I think as a film, Denis Villeneuve truly gets how to bring this material to the big screen within the genre of sci-fi. It may only be the first half of the novel, and for all we know, the second part may not live up to expectations, but just looking at this first part as a single film alone, I think this is the definitive adaptation of the source material we've already got on screen. If part 2 does follow that trend, and maybe we'll even get a film to round out a trilogy, then I think Denis is on to even greater things come the end of his version of the story. It's with the aim at bringing this material to the theatrical world today, while giving a take that will connect with fans of the book, and I think his approach at making a film for all of these different types of audiences is fitting considering how much he needed to do right to pull this off. It's just my opinion, and I know there will always be those who don't particularly like a film or a certain adaptation, but I think when it comes to the majority of people who have seen this version of Dune so far, then many are extremely happy with the outcome. I can't wait for Dune Part 2 to finally come out in 2023, where we get to see the complete vision of director Denis Villeneuve and his so far successful adaptation of Dune. But what do you think towards the points I have discussed in this video, and do you agree that Denis Villeneuve did the famous novel justice? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. For more breakdown videos on Denis Villeneuve's Dune, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.